Hi everyone, this is the lecture to accompany Chapter 4 in your textbook. Please read Chapter 4 thoroughly as it contains information I don't have time to address in this lecture. Okay, let's find out about using verbal and nonverbal messages in a group. The example at the beginning of the chapter is about a student committee tasked with choosing a convocation speaker. One of their members is spending a semester abroad and has to communicate with the group via email, text, and Skype. One member of the group teased the absent member on Skype, calling her a lazy butt. Everyone in the conversation implicitly understood that this was not an insult, but a friendly tease that need not be taken seriously. How did they know this? Because all of the elements of the message taken together help them to come to that conclusion. The words, the context or the situation, their knowledge of each other, and the nonverbal aspects of communication like tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language. The text defines a message as any action, sound, or word in interaction that is interpreted as a whole by another person. We tend to think of a message as solely involving words, but it's much more than that. A message consists of the verbal, language portion, and the nonverbal portion, which refers to everything else you do along with saying the words. These two things are indivisible. That means they work in combination to fully create a message. Even though they work together, we can look at them separately. Let's start by looking at the verbal aspects of group communication. Language is symbolic. Words in and of themselves are simply symbols that represent objects or ideas. The meanings of a word do not reside in the word. Instead, meanings reside in us. If I use a word, it's because the meaning of the word as I know it is the idea that I want to get across. One way language can get us into trouble is when we fall victim to bypassing. Bypassing happens when people attribute different meanings to the same word, but they don't realize it. The book gives an example of a group that wants to do a community service project with the theme of patriotism. They all agreed that this was a good idea, but during a subsequent meeting, they realized that they had a problem. Apparently, the word meant something different to different people in the group, and they got embroiled in an argument when one person brought up the possibility of holding a peace rally. Now, to that person, rallying for peace was a way to be patriotic. To the other people in the group, patriotism meant to support military troops abroad. They had thought that they all understood the same meaning of patriotism, but they didn't. The problem is that words like patriotism, success, leadership, love, these are abstract and somewhat ambiguous. They have different meanings, and unless we clarify exactly what we mean when we say abstract words, we can contribute to misunderstandings. Concrete words and phrases, on the other hand, are specific and say exactly what we mean. For instance, the word chair refers to any chair. If I mean to get across to you that I am referring to a specific chair, I need to be more concrete and say something like my office desk chair. Now you know exactly what I mean. Clarity is key to good communication in groups. Another key to good communication in groups is organization. One of the most annoying and unproductive things that can happen in meetings is when people just talk aimlessly, wander from point to point without making any headway or coming to any agreement or consensus, or everyone's just talking at once and people are throwing their opinions out there without any connection to what was said previously. The best way to avoid this is to discuss things in an organized way. Move from idea to idea by mentioning the preceding statement, then moving on to your statement. State one thing only and state it clearly and directly. Might this take a bit longer? Yes, but it's worth it so everyone understands what's being said. It's also very important in group communication that you be sensitive to the feelings of others. The climate of a group can be damaged when people don't take other group members' feelings into consideration. Those people may feel that they can't speak up, and they may not contribute to the discussions. The use of emotive or trigger words, these are words that are very strongly offensive, like sexist or racial epithets or insults, can make it very difficult to listen to the message underneath the words. Getting to know each other can help the group come to an understanding about what kind of language is acceptable and what should be avoided, at least during times when the group is working together. Different groups have different rules for communicating. Some are more formal, while others are more relaxed. There is a term known as code switching that means you're able to communicate differently in different groups. For instance, you would communicate one way when out with a group of friends at a bar, and perhaps a completely different way at a dinner where you're going to meet your girlfriend or boyfriend's parents for the first time. We understand that context plays a role in which kind of words we choose to use. For purposes of this class, it's always better if you stick to standard English. You certainly don't have to use titles when you refer to each other, but just realize that the words you use need to be understood by everyone in your group, not just a select person or two. Let's move on to nonverbal communication. I don't know if you realize this, but in face-to-face conversation, most of the meaning is communicated nonverbally. So understanding nonverbal aspects of sending messages is very important. Nonverbal behavior is anything in the message that's not the words that you use. Even when you're not talking, you're communicating. Your body language, eye contact, facial expressions, these convey an immense amount of information. Nonverbal communication is ambiguous. A gesture may mean different things to different people, so it's really important to consider the context in order to understand the message. We're always sending messages nonverbally even when we aren't talking. In fact, listening behaviors like eye contact, nodding, smiling, and things like that help a speaker to know that you're paying attention to them. Because nonverbal communication is such a big part of the message, if the words and the nonverbals contradict each other, it's far more likely that a listener will believe the nonverbal communication over the verbal. For instance, if you ask someone how they're doing and they say, "I'm fine," you might take them at their word. Unless, that is, while they're saying, "I'm fine," they're also rolling their eyes and shaking their head. Then you are much more likely to believe that they're not fine. Nonverbal parts of messages serve many functions. They're the main way we convey emotion, mostly with our face and our eyes. We also show how we feel about the other people in our group nonverbally, like when we sit next to someone or lean forward when they talk. They can be used to supplement words to make the message clearer, or they can even be used as substitutes for words. They can be used to regulate the flow of discussion, as when you hold up a finger so that you can continue talking when you're not finished, or nod at someone else to let them know it's their turn. And you can use them to contradict another's message, like shaking your head or tilting your head to the side and frowning. There are lots of categories of nonverbal behavior. You may be surprised when you realize how much of what we do sends messages. Yes, our very appearance sends messages to others. Gender, race, height, build, body type, and other things we may not be able to do much about gives impressions about us to others. We have to be careful not to stereotype others based on what they look like, but we also do need to realize that there are a lot of implicit messages that are being sent by our appearance. Other things we do have control over, like our grooming, the way we dress, our makeup, whether we have tattoos or body ornaments. Those also send messages about us, and often those are deliberate on our part. You certainly are not required to conform to a particular dress code in your group. However, remember that if your appearance is radically different from the other group members, it may be perceived that you're not really identifying with the group as a whole. So you might need to prove yourself in other ways to let them know that you are a part of the group. Another way we communicate nonverbally is through the way we use space. Proxemics is the study of how people use space to communicate. How close we sit to each other sends a message. Culturally, Americans tend to like their personal space, while people from other countries and cultures are often perfectly okay with getting pretty close to each other. The farther away you are from each other, the more formal and less personal the meeting will be. The seating arrangement of people in meetings, known as group ecology, can say a lot about the relationships in the group. If people are sitting close to each other, even if there's room to spread out, that tends to signify that they like each other. If everyone sits close together except for one person who prefers to sit away from everyone, that might signal that he or she does not feel like they're part of the group. It can be risky to violate space norms unless you are a high-status member of a group. For instance, when President Trump shakes someone's hand, he pulls them towards him and grips their hand tightly, gets very close, and doesn't let go of their hand for quite a while. That's very much a power play, but since he's the president, he gets away with it, but you probably couldn't. It's a good idea in your groups to try and find a comfortable distance from each other that still conveys closeness, but doesn't make people uncomfortable. And if you can find a way to sit, maybe not in a circle, but something close to that, it can make a big difference in the way you interact. Facial expressions and eye contact are critically important in nonverbal communication. The thing about eye contact is that it is a signal that communication is open. Students often look down when I ask a question in class. That's a signal that they don't want to communicate and answer the question. Now, eye contact does not mean staring at someone, which can be very disconcerting. You can certainly look down or away and then back to the speaker. But in truly cohesive groups, there's a lot more people looking at each other than looking away from each other. As far as expressions go, we use our face to convey things like agreement and disagreement, along with all the basic emotions like happiness, sadness, or anger. We tend to monitor each other's facial expressions in groups to help us determine the group's climate. Some people are simply more expressive than others, but we can still pick out generally how people are feeling. Another way we communicate nonverbally is through our movements. People tend to turn towards things and people they like, and away from things they dislike. Leaning forward while someone is speaking lets that speaker know that you're paying attention, while leaning back in a chair is often a status move. In cohesive groups, members tend to unconsciously imitate each other's posture and movement. We also move more when we're nervous or tense. The way we use our voices is also nonverbal communication. Now that might seem confusing, but remember, the verbal aspect of a message is the actual words. Everything else, including how we say those words, is nonverbal. Think about it. If you say, "Could you please come here?" to someone, that's a friendly request. If you say, "Could you please come here?" it's now an unfriendly command. The words are the same. It's how they're said that helps the listener understand the meaning. We can use vocal aspects like pitch, how high or low our voice falls on the musical scale, volume, how loud or soft it is, speed, how fast or slow we say the words, fluency, how clearly we pronounce and articulate the words, and how we use silence or pauses. Many of us do something called back-channeling, where we vocalize things like usually to show that we understand or agree. Dialect is also a form of nonverbal communication. Specific accents convey information about where someone is from, but you need to be careful not to stereotype someone based on their accent. How we use time is perhaps the most interesting nonverbal behavior. Use of time has both relational and cultural implications. If you have a meeting with someone important, it's not unusual for that person to keep you waiting for a period of time before you're ushered into their office. That's a signal that they have higher status than you, or at least they think they do. Someone who's chronically late to meetings, and that lateness can't be explained by things like car problems or traffic, is likely to be sending the message that their time is precious, but yours isn't. However, there are cultures in which time is not considered as important as it is in our American culture, like Polynesian cultures. When I was in Hawaii, if a small locally owned store had an opening time of 11 a.m., it may or may not be open at that time. It would open when the proprietor decided to open, and nobody generally thought anything negative about that. However, time tends to be considered a precious commodity here on the mainland. It's certainly important to use time wisely during meetings, as we all have better things to do than sit around while nothing gets done. So keep these things in mind. It's okay to have a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting to chat, but do your best to start close to the appointed time. And don't be the person that talks excessively and doesn't allow anybody else to get a word in edgewise. Don't be consistently late. It's perceived as rude. Everyone should be aware of the time constraints the group is under and work to make sure that all topics are addressed during the meeting. It's really important to become more aware of your own and others' use of nonverbal communication to be able to truly understand the messages that are being sent. You certainly can't tell exactly what someone's thinking or feeling from nonverbal cues alone, but you can interpret them along with the words to do your best to understand. Table 4.2 on page 79 is a funny but not so funny list of things that you should do if you want your fellow group members to dislike you. The list contains things like don't smile, don't lean forward, text message your friends when other people are talking, things like that. Obviously, you shouldn't be doing those things. But when they're written out like this, it's obvious how rude and inappropriate they are, and they can affect the group negatively. Your group is going to interact with each other in several different ways, face-to-face, through email and text, possibly Skype or other video platforms, and on discussion boards on your group pages. While the same basic communication principles apply no matter what the channel of communication, it can be difficult to get messages across clearly when nonverbal communication is limited or non-existent. If you can't see each other, you might miss important nonverbal cues that would help you determine exactly what message is being sent. There's less of a social presence online because there's something in the way. That something could be a computer or a phone, and it puts another level between you and the other members of your group that can impede communication. So in these situations, words become more important and take over the job that is usually done by nonverbal communication. You might need to be more explanatory and descriptive to get your point across. Maybe use a story or an example of what you mean. Emoticons can also fill in the blanks left by lack of verbal communication. Yes, humans can get very creative online when attempting to get their messages across. This is the end of the lecture on Chapter 4.